Welcome back to another edition of the Saturday to Sunday Football Podcast. I am Paul Perticchese, and thank you for joining me. As always, week 2 of the college football season is in the book. Week 1 of the NFL season is concluding as we are set to kick off this episode. Lot to talk about, and I'm really excited to have across the way tonight special guest co-host Ian Cummings of Pro Football Network. Ian, thank you so much for joining us. I'm glad you were able to make the time to hop on with me.
Yeah, it's a great time to talk football, right? The NFL season is kicking off, and we got the college football season. We're through week 2 as well, so it's a lot of fun. A lot of storylines that are just developing now, so we'll get to follow them through the season. But this is the best time of year because we've been evaluating guys in the summer, and then now we kind of get to see how those evaluations age, what is changing, and already a lot of things have been changing in the first couple weeks. So I'm glad to be talking ball, and I'm glad to be here with you.
Absolutely. And yeah, there's a lot to dissect. So let's just get right into it. For people who listened last week, I was privileged to have on guest co-host Andrew Harbog with me, and he will be back this season for sure. Now with the NFL season in gear, we kind of have 4 segments during our season shows. The bulk of the show is the NFL Draft Report, where we talk about draft eligible prospects. We'll dig into that momentarily. We do a quick Devy Slant Report, maybe 1 or 2 names, underclassmen, non-draft eligible guys that may have stood out this week. And then we incorporate the NFL stuff with the NFL Rookie Report. We do so much talking about these guys last year. I love being able to check in on these guys. And then we end it with a quick Dynasty Fantasy Report, anything significant from the NFL in terms of maybe changing the landscape, for people who are Dynasty players, in terms of stock up, stock down, in terms of storylines, injuries, stuff like that. So let's get right into the NFL Draft Stock Report for this week. Let's start right at the quarterback position. And I really do think this was kind of the Quinn Ewers coming out party. This was Texas's coming out party. They went on the road and really destroyed Michigan in that game. I think sent a real message. And I think for Quinn Ewers, it was a big moment. Michigan is not the team that won the national title last year, but they're still a very strong team with a strong defense. And Ewers looked really comfortable in the pocket, really poised, in control, 3 touchdowns, 246 yards. And it was one of those games that if Michigan was able to push back, I think it could have been like a 350 or 400-yard, 4-touchdown kind of game for Quinn Ewers if he needed it to be. But Texas just didn't have to, continue to have the throttle, pushing down there because, Michigan was unable to do much on the offensive side of the ball. And I kind of want to almost talk about Ewers standalone for a second, maybe what your thoughts either were before the season started, where you kind of are now after 2 weeks into the year. Is he a guy that I think his natural skill set, the arm talent, the athleticism, and with the class not what it was last year, I could see Ewers' stock soaring after this week. And if he continues to show this refinement and development that I was looking for, to potentially be a top 10 pick next year in the 2025 NFL draft. So, Ian, your thoughts on Ewers, whether it's this week, whether it's more big picture, what we've seen so far, and where you think maybe his draft stock could be headed if this continues?
Yeah, for sure. I'll start broad scale. The 2025 NFL Draft QB class has a few guys that I think have a little bit more prestige than they do solidification with their stock right now. Ewers is one of those guys. I think Shedeur Sanders is one of those guys too. Guys who have been kind of in the spotlight since the very start, since they first landed on the CFP stage. Ewers was the top overall recruit, signed with Ohio State, had the transfer saga, right? That whole deal. So he's had the hype for a while, right? Like we've had that. And I do think there's a little bit of an effect, across the broad consensus landscape, where if a guy has that residual hype, that can inflate his stock a little bit in the eyes of the consensus, right? So Quinn Ewers entering the season for me had a day 3 grade entering the season for me because I looked at the arm talent. It's definitely there, the arm elasticity, but a lot of things that I saw on the 2023 tape, a lack of discipline and control with his mechanics and timing is the best way that I can describe it succinctly, right? And it showed up often enough for me where I'm looking at his athleticism, his creative ability. Like he's creative for sure, but I don't see the elite athlete, size adjusted, like running threat to counteract that when you're not disciplined operationally, right? So that was the hang up for me with Quinn Ewers. And going off of that, I think this Michigan game was probably one of the best, if not the best, diagnostic game that I've seen from him. All of the things that I wanted to see when you talk about discipline, a lot of the words that you use when you were introducing him, right? Poise, control, really good timing, really good, efficiency, not dropping back too far. Depth discipline is a big thing with him in the pocket. He likes to drift and kind of free play a little bit, but I think he played with a lot more control. And we saw how that control is able to channel and maximize that special arm talent he has, because the arm talent is special. His arm strength is very good. I would say it's more the elasticity, the angle freedom that makes him so unique. But he can weaponize that in different ways. And I think he was well within control of it this game. Like you said, too, the game script really played into his hand. Michigan was never really a threat in that game, and it allowed Texas to control the game. So that does play into Ewers' support a little bit, but, that's not to take away from the performance that he had. I think diagnostically, all of the questions that I had about him, can he play with control? Can he play with discipline? Can he stay on time, right? All of those things he showed in this game. So you want to see him repeat it week over week. But for me, it was a really promising event, because I was looking at his tape and I'm thinking to myself, this QB class is still pretty wide open. Carson Beck is my QB1. I like what we've seen from Drew Aller, and I'm sure we'll get to him a little bit later. But, aside from those guys, I don't see a lot of solidification at the top of the board. And Quinn Ewers playing this well operationally with the arm talent he has. He's not a generational rushing threat, right? But he's creative enough to work off platform. If he can keep this going, I do think the early rounds are on the table for him. So to answer your question, I want to see more from him. I want to, keep the book open. But this game was probably the most promising that I've seen from him from an evaluative standpoint, just because it answered so many questions. Can he play with control, discipline? We know he can. Now we just need to keep it going. Paul, I think you're muted right now.
The last time I was probably this excited about Quinn Ewers was that early portion of that game against Alabama when he got injured, and it looked like he was really going to have like a coming out party that game. So to see this performance, and let's see now if it's repetitive. Can we have that consistency? You kind of brought him up, Drew Aller. Andrew and I last week when we did the week 1 recap, we kind of talked about Drew Aller and how he looked in that week 1 performance, and we kind of wanted to see him continue to show that refinement and development, not have some poor decision making, show more consistency in terms of the ball placement and the accuracy. He had a pretty good game this week as well. Penn State had a little bit of a scare there, but he was 13 of 20, 204 yards, 2 touchdowns. Didn't, no big mistakes there. Wasn't as good as his week 1 performance. So I'd be interested to hear your kind of take on Alar. Is he a guy that you think could emerge in this class as well? And then on the flip side, I thought it was another really poor performance from Riley Leonard, obviously an atrocious loss for Notre Dame. He's been a guy that I've just struggled with when I've seen other people in the industry who I respect a lot have him in like top 5s, top 10s over the last couple of years. I've just never really seen it from Riley Leonard. I thought this was a really poor performance from him. Have not seen a lot thinking that this is a guy who could even be a top 100 pick. So if you want to say anything about Leonard, and then you brought up Shedeur Sanders, and there's a lot to like about Sanders' game on the field. I talked about it last week. There's a lot of things he really does well. This was not a good week for obviously Colorado. Nebraska really, handled them well. But the question that I have about Sanders is something I'm never going to be privy to. And I'm so curious at what NFL teams do, because when he talks, like teams I think are going to be very hesitant to make him the face of the franchise, because whether he just is like speaking the truth and he's not really thinking about what he's saying, like it just comes across as a lack of accountability at times and a lack of understanding that as the quarterback, you're the face of a team, you're the face of a program in college, or the face of an NFL franchise, that like when things are bad, you want to stand up there. Listen, I'm in New York. It's been torture watching Daniel Jones for all these years. But at least he's always there, accountable, taking blame, putting it on him as a quarterback should do. It's going to be interesting. And again, we won't be privy to what goes on in meetings, but I would love to get a, behind the sneak curtain look at like NFL teams talking about Shedeur, and do they question whether he could be that face of the franchise? Because I do believe in a lot of the talent. I am intrigued with him. I think he's got besides Travis Hunter, his supporting cast there is not, much of anything. And I think at times he elevates them, which is what you want to see. But there's just aspects of what comes across, in my opinion, as poor leadership that I do wonder if that will hinder his draft stock come next April. So I know I kind of threw a lot out there. If there's anything you want to kind of start with Drew Aller, where I started, and then maybe, any quick thoughts on Leonard and what I brought up there with Shedeur.
Yeah, for sure. I'll start with Sanders because I think it's what's on the mind of a lot of people right now, with good reason. He was one of the guys who was touted as one of the top QBs in the class to start off, right? Some people had him as the QB1. I think that's, to me, Beck has that pretty safely, right? But I can see how he'd be in the conversation. So with this QB class, Sanders, with his talent, he's in the discussion, and I do think it's safe. I think it's reasonable to scrutinize it. I really do, because you look at these NFL teams and what they're looking for. The QB evaluation is just as much physical on the field as it is mental and off the field, right? And we've seen this Deion Sanders era at Colorado. Things kind of go as the Sanders clan wants it to, right? Like you look at Deion Sanders, he's been going through the transfer portal a lot, right? He's saying like, hey, we're going to get a lot of movement here. It was a big point of controversy this past offseason in 2024 because there were some players that left through the transfer portal and ended up, saying things that weren't too good about the program and how it was being run, like, not accountable, no empathy, right? Things like that. And as a result, there was that whole tweet saga where Shadur Sanders tweeted, this guy was mid anyway. We can forget about him, right? And it's little things like that, but it makes you think, if you're a player and you're considering coming here to Colorado, if I somehow rub this guy the wrong way, right? Like, how am I going to be treated? How am I going to feel about that? And then you see, this press conference after the game in Nebraska, he has a chance to take accountability for that interception, which was thrown late, right? Maybe it was a miscommunication with the receiver, but either way, you could see Tommy Hill was breaking on it, right? Don't throw the ball, just try and get a small gain up the middle or something like that. It's a tough situation when you're backed in your own end zone, but he blamed the freshman wide receiver. It's like rookie mistake. And then, when they're talking about the sacks, how many times did Dylan Raiola get touched, right? I was getting touched all day. That's beside the point. We know the offensive line still isn't really up to snuff right now. But at the same time, if you're a quarterback, the last thing you want to do is throw your teammates under the bus at the open mic, right? You can't do that. It's just not a good leadership decision, like you said. And if we see that on the surface, NFL teams are definitely going to be scrutinizing and asking what's beneath the surface, right? Is this a prevalent problem? Is this kind of festering a little bit more underneath the surface? They have the resources to answer those questions more than, a football scout on Twitter like me can, right? So, I can only say what I've seen on the surface, but from what I've seen in the limited sample, it is a concern for me. On the field, he's a very talented player. I know he's garnered some comparisons to Geno Smith as a passer with his accuracy, his mobility in the pocket, right? I think when he's on, he's got good pre-snap work, right? I think the operational side is pretty solid with him, but I don't think he's the transcendent elite physical talent to counteract these questions off the field. So it is something that's worth that. I think the discussion with it holds merit. And but at the same time too, he's a young guy, they can learn, right? So you don't want to write him off right away, but understand, I do think it's going to be a point of contention because leadership is important. Character is important. It's probably one of the most important things when you're identifying a franchise signal caller. So those are my thoughts on Sanders. I do think it merits a discussion. These incidents off the field and at pressers and open mics. Going to Riley Leonard real quick. I'll make my thoughts on him quick because we just haven't seen translatable NFL reps to this point over the past 2 seasons. I think last year at Duke, obviously the injuries played a part. The supporting cast wasn't great. But that redshirt freshman season was really good. You saw a lot of great flashes of situational precision. He's clearly a very good athlete. He's a great rushing threat. I think his arm is good enough. But over these past 2 seasons, right? Last year, he was never able to find a rhythm. And I still think he hasn't found it at Notre Dame. So, to me right now, I'm in agreement with you. I think top 100 is pretty unlikely. If you can't string together solid games, if you can't show that you can operate in the pocket and be a translatable pro quarterback, those pro reps, what are you looking for? Pocket management, poise in the pocket, timing, accuracy, anticipation. I think Riley Leonard, just from a pure talent perspective and character-wise too, I think all the reviews have been rave reviews for him. His character, humble guy, a natural leader. But at the same time, if you can't string together pro-ready reps, that's going to limit your viability as a prospect. I still think we're waiting to see that. I think the silver lining is that redshirt freshman season did happen at Duke. Like, he was very efficient in that limited sample, but he hasn't gotten the magic back since then. And I think, until he finds that rhythm again, it's going to be tough sledding. Now, Notre Dame lost a lot of their talent on offense. They lost Joe Alt, Blake Fisher. Those are tough losses, right? And especially for Riley Leonard, who I think one of his bigger issues is pocket poise, right? I think he's a tough competitor, but poise is different because poise is one of those things where you're stepping up into the pocket and you can feel the rush bearing down. Your body does habitual things that you can't always control if you're not poised enough, right? Like flinching a little bit, losing your mechanical synergy. I don't think Riley Leonard is good enough at counteracting that yet. And I think that's a big snowball effect for the rest of his game. So he's got to improve that. Again, not writing him off. I think the talent is absolutely there, but we haven't seen it yet so far this year. It's been 2 games. Got to get it together. And then Drew Aller. I think the talent is through the roof with this guy. I think if you ask me which QB in the 2025 NFL draft has the highest ceiling, Drew Aller would be in that discussion. His arm it's a rocket launcher, man. And it's so easy for him to generate velocity. He can go off platform. He's got the angle freedom to it as well. And I have been pretty encouraged by what I've seen so far. I think the Bowling Green game was a little bit more iffy than the one before against West Virginia, but that's okay. You're going to be a little up and down. I'm very intrigued to see what he does in Big Ten play this year, because the Big Ten is going to be very tough. It's going to test him a lot. But all in all, I think so far, this limited 2-game sample, the one thing that I wanted to see more of from Drew Aller, don't treat every ball like a fastball, right? In 2023, a lot of throws, he's got this crazy arm talent, but he didn't always know how to rein it in and manage it and control it. And as a result, you got throws like a slot fade that you want to loft over the DB a little bit, right? And he's pushing it too far because he doesn't know how to put loft on it. He doesn't know how to layer that pace and touch. And I think he's improved in that for sure. There was the back shoulder pylon TD throw against West Virginia where he placed it perfectly for Harrison Wallace Jr. And then the anticipation on breaks is really strong so far. I think the processing was definitely there on his 2023 tape. I think you can tell he knows how to read the field. He knows how to anticipate breaks. He knows how to stay on time. But accuracy and mechanics were a big enough issue, especially when climbing up into the pocket, that you could tell he needed to improve. And that's a young QB thing. It happens a lot. But I have been very encouraged with what I've seen from Drew Aller. He's not quite the running threat at his size of like a Josh Allen. I don't think he's quite that running threat, but he's such a dangerous thrower with his composite arm talent. He can make the throws that not a lot of guys can make just because he can get it 30 yards out across the hash and hit that tight window before it closes, right? That's a special thing. And I think when you see that ability start to get incubated by the operational growth around it, that's even more exciting. So again, kind of like all these other QBs, we're waiting to see more. It's only been 2 weeks, but Drew Aller has been more promising than most within this 2-week sample. And I think a lot of credit goes to Andy Kotelnicki, who came over from Kansas, the offensive coordinator. He's been scheming him ways to succeed. The weaponry is improved. Again, Harrison Wallace Jr., or the third is a part of that. It's the third, I think. Tyler Warren as well, a tight end coming back. So they've got some weapons, but I think Drew Aller has been elevating them, and I think he's elevated his game as well.
Yeah, and I think the whole theme of this year is going to be watching these quarterbacks put on consistent film, because I think we're going to see bits and pieces of guys showing out and showing that skill set. But I think for NFL teams, it's going to be, do we have some consistency that makes you feel a little bit more comfortable investing in a first-round pick? And, you go up and down. There's a lot of teams that are going to be in the quarterback market. So I feel like it's one of those things where if they show enough, there are going to be teams that get intrigued with some of these players. And then depending on what we see in terms of, the overall consistency and refinement, just how high some of these guys could get pushed up the board. Let's spin this over to the running backs. I'm going to kind of go through a couple and then just open the floor for you maybe to touch upon one or two that you want to kind of elaborate on. The Penn State guys continue to look really good. You just talked about their offense as a whole. Nicholas Singleton, making people remember why he was one of the top, high school running back prospects in the country when he went to Penn State. 119 yards, a touchdown, another big play. We talked about him last week as well. His teammate, Katron Allen, went over 100 yards this week also. I think both of those guys, interesting prospects. I think Singleton could push his way into that, potential top 75, top 100 mix, with some of the other bigger names, heading into the season. DJ Giddens is a guy who's I think he's like my 7th or 8th running back. I'm really intrigued by Giddens' overall skill set. This past week, 114 yards on the ground, 63 yards receiving and a touchdown. I think he offers a capability of being a 3-down back at the next level. So I like what I saw out of Giddens this past week. Obviously, the lead, Ashton Genty, I talked about him a lot last week. He's probably going to be a name I could talk about just about every week, but 192 yards and 3 touchdowns for, against Oregon this past week. Boise State almost pulls off the upset. And I think I said it last week. I said it on my preview shows before the season started. To me, Genty's kind of in his own tier at the running back class. I think he's the one guy that has a chance to be in that round 1 mix because of his versatility to impact the game as a receiver and a runner. I think the next group of guys who I like a lot, and Ollie Gordon and Amari Hampton and the Ohio State guys, and then Singleton maybe after that, I think those guys are more like a big tier 2 after Gentry in the top of my tier. I think he continues to show that. And then Jamarian Miller out of Alabama, I thought was really impressive this week. 15 carries, 140 yards. Obviously in Alabama, especially the running back position, I always feel like you're kind of waiting your turn. And now it's kind of his opportunity there. And he looked really good this week. He could be a guy that wasn't on a lot of top 10 running back boards prior to the season starting, but we could see him really move up draft boards if he has a really strong year. So, Ian, any thoughts on any of these running backs? Maybe pick one or two that you kind of want to expand upon on what I talked about.
Yeah, for sure. Giddens and Miller, I need to watch a little bit more of. I'll be honest when I haven't gotten enough of guys, and those are two that I need to circle back to. But I'm intrigued. I've heard Giddens' name. I got to catch a little bit of his tape last year, and I'm intrigued by the skill set. Miller, you mentioned it with Alabama. That's a conveyor belt at RB, right? And a lot of times they are waiting their turn, and especially this year with, I think, Jalen Milroe at QB, the rushing offense can be a lot more dynamic with how they use those guys in tandem. So I'm intrigued by that. So I got to get more reps on tape for those guys, but intrigued as well. This RB class is crazy, man. And I think this is the conversation that we're going to have. We keep coming back to it. There are always more names that pop up, right? But it starts at the top. It starts with Ashton Jeanty. When I graded him this summer, he graded near a blue chip grade for me, preliminary, which he's my highest graded since Bijan Robinson. And I don't think he's going to catch Bijan. Bijan was different. But Jeanty is pretty different in his own right as well. And I think we've seen that so far this year. It's been great to see him succeed the way he has. Obviously, the first week with 6 TDs, 267 yards. And then at Oregon, he's like, hey, I am legit. I'll prove it against the top 10, top 15 team, right? So the ability is definitely there in a rare, uncommon level, I think. And I think I'm trying to figure out how to articulate what makes him so difficult to tackle. I think it's a combination of a few things, right? The agility, the elusiveness, obviously athletically, the explosiveness and the burst, the contact balance, being 5'8", 217 pounds. Like, that dude is rocked up. That dude is low to the ground, and he is physical. He's not going to go down without a fight. And then the vision, the creative instincts. He has incredible spatial awareness. I think those three things really combined to make him an elite runner. And then you mentioned it too. He hasn't been utilized as a receiving threat so far this year a lot, but last year he was utilized a great deal. He can run routes. He's fluid. He's very instinctive. So he'll be a 3-down threat. Jeanty is definitely in a tier above. I like him a lot. But yeah, a few of those other guys as well. I think a couple names that stood out to me this past week. Dylan Sampson from Tennessee. Tennessee's offense, by the way, Nico Iamaleava. If we're talking about Devy QBs, I think he's kind of in that tier with. It feels to me like the conversation with Drake May and Caleb Williams a year before they were eligible. You kind of just know he's going to be in that conversation. The polish already at such a young age. The arm is like a slingshot. The velocity that he can generate and the athleticism too. So Nico Iamaleava. I know the pronunciation can be a little tricky, but he's a player for sure. But Dylan Sampson at RB as well. I think Jalen Wright was a big name last cycle. They're similarly sized. Sampson's around 5'11", 201. He doesn't quite have the vertical speed that Wright had, which Wright he's got that blazing speed, right? So you can't really replicate that. But Dylan Sampson, to me, I've been really impressed with how fluid he is navigating the second level with his lateral agility, right? I think the vision is strong, and he's got some underrated physicality for his size, so a name to watch. And then another one who really caught my eye this week, and he was on my radar before the season, but that Northern Illinois team getting the upset on Notre Dame, Antario Brown. I mean, that guy, 2 catches for 126 yards, had the, I think, 83-yard touchdown catch where he motioned into the slot and one up the seam, made a play at the catch point, extended beyond his frame, and then used his speed to seal off the play. You don't normally see that kind of play from a 5'10", 219-pound back. I mean, that's a rocked up dude, and he's out here winning as a slot receiver, right? It's not going to happen every time on every route, but to know that you have that dynamic ability, that versatility in the passing game is really an exciting thing for a player like that. And then he's explosive. He's got pretty good vision. He's really low to the ground, compact, dense as a runner as well, and he can break tackles. So Antario Brown, like that guy a lot from Northern Illinois. I think every so often we see a MAC running back really fly up the board, and I think Antario Brown can be that guy with the ability he has. But you mentioned it earlier. This RB class is packed to the brim. we could go down the list for a long time and we wouldn't be stopping. Jaquindon Jackson from Arkansas transferred over from Utah. He's been great so far. Amarian Hampton, he's like a rock'em sock'em robot at running back with the physicality, the energetic motion that he has. Damian Martinez has been great at Miami. I love his fluidity for his size, being 6 foot, rocked up 240, and yet he's so fluid and bendy on his cuts where he can control the field to finish with physicality. Really fun player. Jaquavius Marks, Woody Marks from USC, pass catching weapon, but he's got some dynamic ability as a runner as well. So the list goes on and on. There's so many names, and I think that's what makes it fun for this class, especially because last year we didn't have that. It was scarce at the top. It was scarce at the bottom. I think we're really going to get spoiled this year with the volume at the top, but then also the depth of the names that are going to be on tap. So fun RB classes are a few that caught my eye in week 2.
Yeah, great names there, especially some guys under the radar. I don't think people have been given a lot of attention to. It's going to be one of those things that every NFL team might grab a running back next year. Like, it's just going to be one of those draft classes. You don't even need somebody, all right, take another one. Like the Jets took Braylon Allen this year after they obviously have Breece Hall, and the year before they took, Israel Abakanda. It's going to be one of those classes that teams are going to take running backs, and it's going to be interesting to see how many go top 100 and how many really good talents are still sitting there on day 3, and it's going to stretch way into day 3. Now, some of these guys will surprise and maybe come back, for their senior year or something like that, or their redshirt junior year and stuff like that, but it's going to be a really deep class. It's a fun class, and I'm right there with you, Genti at the top, and then these other guys will kind of, I think, fill in after him, but there's so many names that are emerging, that like no one really talking about Miller, no one's really talking about Sam. And these are guys that could easily throw themselves into the mix as well as potential top 100 or top 4 round prospects for sure. Let's take this to the pass catchers. Let's hit the tight ends real quick. I talked about him last week. I don't even know if he's being classified as a tight end or a wide receiver right now, but Arondé Gatson out of Syracuse, another big performance this past week, 93 yards, 2 touchdowns. Tyler Warren, you kind of mentioned him before, 8 catches, 146 yards. I think Warren might be the most complete back. Obviously, I think the most highly regarded tight end is going to be, Colston Loveland, but I think Tyler Warren might be the most complete in terms of guy. Line him up in line. You could make him a pass catcher. You could do a little bit of everything. I think teams are really going to be intrigued with Warren for his versatility. And then you put a line like there, 8 for 146 at his size, at his frame, at his blocking ability. I think he's going to really intrigue teams. Could push himself even into be tight end 2 in this class. And then Gadson's not going to be for everybody. You're going to have a set role for him, whether he's a big slot, whether he's a tight end. It'll be interesting to kind of see where his classification is in the pre-draft process. But 93 yards, 2 touchdowns, back-to-back big weeks here from him. Any thoughts on either Warren or Gadsden in terms of what we've seen from them so far?
Yeah, I mean, Warren is probably one of the most complete tight ends in the class. I think you're absolutely on point with that evaluation, and that's important for NFL teams. Can you block? Can you play in line? Can you play in the slot if you need to? Can you motion out? Can you be utilized on motions? And can you grasp the offense in its full capacity, right? Things like that. But then as a receiver, can you do all those things? Can you generate rack? Can you win at the catch point? Can you run routes, separate? And I think, I liked him more than Theo Johnson last year. Theo Johnson came out, I think he went round 3 or round 4 to the Giants. You'll know better than I did because I forgot. I think it was in round 3 or 4. But he was in the middle rounds and he was athletic. The NFL Combine performance was great for him. And on tape, the explosiveness definitely showed up. The speed and bend at the Senior Bowl as well was a highlight for Theo Johnson. But, there were some focus drops. There was some issues with blocking leverage, right? And I was looking at Tyler Warren at the same time. And I'm thinking this guy's a little more complete. He's a little more natural, consistent on a down-and-out basis. And looking at how he's producing now this year, that's kind of all that you wanted to see, just take over as that top tight end. And he's really done that. And I think Ewers' emergence has played into that. But also you see 2 prospects really magnifying each other's performance. And that's the fun thing. So Tyler Warren, for his size, has the athleticism. I think he has the blocking ability, the versatility. And that versatility, that all-around utility is such a valuable thing at the NFL level. So I could see him being a tight end too. Terrence Ferguson from Oregon was also in that discussion for me entering the year. I haven't kept up with his production so far, but last year with Bo Nix, really liked his tape. So I think he'll be in that conversation as well. But Gadsden is kind of a different mold because he played wide receiver earlier in his career. He was going to switch to tight end before the season last year, but got taken out with that injury really early. I think it was a Liz Frank injury, so a foot, and he had to come back. And get fully healthy from that. And he's been great so far this year. I question, like you said, where his fit is going to be because we haven't seen a ton of traditional blocking reps for him, right? And if you're a team who plays a lot of 1-2 personnel, right, you're going to want to have that guy be able to play in line if you need him to, right? The NFL, the modern NFL, is all about creating and exploiting mismatches before the snap and then during the play, right? So, having a tight end who can move inline or outside and fulfill any type of role that you need him to, that's a valuable thing. I don't know if Gadsden is quite at that level with that ability, right? That said, I do think is a big slot weapon at wide receiver, right? Or kind of a guy who blends the line between receiver and tight end, is that receiving, that pass game mismatch maker. He can be really good in that role. I think as a route runner at 6'5", 220, the dude defies physics sometimes. He's explosive, he's energized, really fleet-footed, wins very consistently at the catch point with that box-out ability, that positional awareness, right? And the physicality, the strong hands. So I think, honestly, if I ran my grades for him again, he might grade higher at receiver than he would at tight end, just because the blocking is such a big thing. And I question his ability there on a down-and-out basis, especially in line. But if you need a mismatch generator and a guy who can capitalize on those, Gadsden is definitely that kind of player. A few other tight ends for me. Colston Loveland, obviously still the top guy. I know he had a couple bad focus drops this past week against Texas, but it's a minor issue for a player who, to me, is a special route runner, a special athlete at the position, right? So still my tight end 1, still a first-round guy for me. Want to see some more consistency. I know the QB situation in Michigan doesn't play into that very well, but the talent is definitely there in a high degree. Harold Fannin Jr. from Bowling Green is the guy that I want to mention, because he has been red hot. He had a great week 1, and then against Penn State, he had 11 catches for 136 yards and a touchdown. He accounted for more than 50% of the receiving production. So Harold Fannin Jr., man, he is a dude, and he's rising up the board for me. 6'4", 235, but he can block. He can hold his own as a blocker. I love how he plays square to his opponents. He attacks. He gets to his landmarks very well. But then as a receiving weapon, too, he's a fluid route runner. He's got some twitch to win off separation and off releases, right? He's got very good hands at the catch point. He flows the football with body control, and he's got some rack to him as well. The versatility. Fannin Jr. is a guy that I keep looking at, and I haven't gotten a composite grade on him yet. But the more I watch his game, you always wonder with MAC prospects, are they good for the MAC, or are they truly good NFL prospects who could rise up the board? With Quinyon Mitchell, he ended up going round 1. With Fannin, I think he could potentially be a mid-round contender. I like his game a lot. I think he's a very solid player. And there's a few other tight ends that are kind of fluttering around in my mind, but I think Fannin is definitely the one who's impressed me the most, just with what he's done. Gunnar Helm of Texas, after his performance against Michigan, I feel like you have to mention him, because, again, that was a very complete showing. Ran routes, he separated, he wanted to catch points in tight spots, and he was generating rack too. So Gunnar Helm, especially after Jatavian Sanders, going pretty early in the draft last year, that's something that'll take focus. I liked his performance as well. But tight end is another position where a few guys that could have come out last year. Tyler Warren was one, Ferguson was another, Luke Lachey coming back from injury. A lot of guys who are experienced but add to the depth of the class, and I think that volume is really going to benefit NFL teams down the road.
Yeah, so fun group there that I think it'll be interesting to kind of see who materializes into the top 2, tight end 2, tight end 3, tight end 4, because I do think it is wide open. You brought some new names up there, which I think we could see that opening where some guys that we weren't seeing in top 5s, top 10s before the season could kind of materialize. Let's take this to the wide receivers here to kind of close out the NFL draft report for this week. I have 5 names of guys that I kind of want to at least mention. Evan Stewart, I thought looked really good in that Oregon game. Obviously, the week 1 was more of a Tej Johnson game. This was Evan Stewart, 5 catches, 112 yards, 1 touchdown. Kind of see him finally now pretty well integrated in that Oregon offense. I think we're going to see a lot of big performances from him the rest of the year. Kyron Lacy now back-to-back weeks, I thought really impressive for LSU. He is not a guy that I did a full deep dive on prior to the season. Obviously, I've seen what he's done over the last 2 weeks. He's on my short list of a guy to add to my scouting notebook. I'll probably give it another couple of weeks, and then I start kind of adding some players when there's enough film for me to really dig into them, like 4 or 5 week sample. And Kyron Lacy is right near the top of that list as maybe one of the first guys I get into the scouting notebook this past week. 65 yards, 3 touchdowns, coming off of last week when he had 94 yards and a touchdown. So he's really been impressive. Theo Wease this week out of Missouri. It wasn't a Luther Burden week. It was a Theo Wease, 13 catches, 149 yards. I feel like we've been talking about Theo Wease for a while from his days at Oklahoma. But he's a guy who I think you'll probably see at one of those all-star games, whether it's the Shrine Bowl or the Senior Bowl, maybe a guy who could be at day 3, round 4 to round 6 type prospect. Another guy on my short list that I got to watch sooner rather than later in terms of more of a deep dive is Ty Felton out of Maryland, 152 yards and a touchdown this week. Last week, 179 yards and 2 touchdowns. I didn't talk about him on last week's show. Now it's back-to-back weeks. So I think him and Lacey are probably at the top of my list to really get some film on after about the 4 weeks, after about the first 4 weeks of the season to kind of get them in my scouting notebook. I already have like 25 wide receiver write-ups, but Felton and Lacey are the top 2 guys that I want to get in so far once there's some enough film on them out there. But really impressive start from him. And then kind of a blast from the past, Mario Williams, after moving around a lot over the last couple of years, former highly regarded prospect, lands at Tulane. And this past week, 128 yards. Week 1, 4 catches, 124 yards. I think it was, somebody from the Senior Bowl was talking about him as a guy that he's on their watch list, as an intriguing prospect. But once upon a time, we thought Williams was going to be that guy that can be maybe an intriguing vertical slot type player. It's nice to kind of see him get off this year to a decent start to see if we can kind of find that way. Once upon a time, we thought he was going to be a really big time prospect. So that was a nice start from him and a kind of a little bit of a name that people have probably forgotten. Some people might not even know he's at Tulane right now, but he's off to a really impressive start. We'll see if he can kind of keep that going and kind of put himself back on the draft radar as maybe a day 3 pick somewhere. So any thoughts on any of those guys? You don't have to hit on all of them, but is there one or two that you kind of want to maybe expand upon?
Yeah, for sure. I'll try and touch on all of them a little bit. Evan Stewart, first off, loved his natural ability. Before the specific thing that I loved, I can't talk today, I'm sorry. The specific thing that I loved about him coming into the year was what made him so compelling as a prospect, right? The explosiveness, the speed, but the hyperactive twitch, right? This is a guy who has a type of suddenness and twitch that's on a level close to like Garrett Wilson. When I remember evaluating Wilson, like this dude is just energized, right? Evan Stewart has that to me. A little bit lighter, kind of featherweight, really wiry, but again, I think he plays beyond his frame. I think he can make really tough catches at the catch point, extending beyond his frame down the field, great tracking. And, I think we've seen a little bit of all of that so far this year. I think the explosion, the route running ability that comes with that twitch and that kind of flexibility and malleability as a separator. And then also the ability to play beyond your frame and kind of shock DBs like, oh, okay, so he can snare footballs like that, right? He's got that ability to him. He's got some chippiness. So I like Evan Stewart's game a lot. I like Tez Johnson's game a lot too. He kind of reminds me a little bit of Tank Dell with the way that, again, he's explosive, he's dynamic, but he can also play beyond his frame when you need him to. A little bit quieter in week 2, but I think those guys will go up and down. They'll feed off each other, and it'll be fun to see how they go. LSU, Kyron Lacey was a very interesting one because they got CJ Daniels from Liberty in the transfer portal, and you were kind of wondering who's going to be the breakout guy this year. It was Brian Thomas Jr., obviously, last year. They had Malik Neighbors, too, so that was just an embarrassment of riches, right? But Kyron Lacey is a player. I actually wrote his name down first at Louisiana back when he was there. I think it was a couple years ago at least. And like 6'2", over 200. And the contact balance was what first caught my eye. I love receivers who can absorb a hit and keep going, stay on their feet. That rack ability was definitely there with him. Last year, he was a rotational receiver for LSU. And again, I liked the ability. I just thought the down-to-down consistency was still kind of lacking with him, right? So, you were kind of hoping this year with a bigger role, can he take advantage of that and kind of run with it? And so far he has. He's been productive with Garrett Nussmeier. Again, I love the explosiveness, the rack ability, the contact balance that comes with his frame, very good play strength, but he's made some plays at the catch point too. He's shown that body control, that extension ability in some really tough spots, kind of, claustrophobic, and he's still gotten there. So the complete showing that we've seen so far has been very encouraging with him. So, anytime you see LSU and wide receiver, there's a little bit of excitement that gets generated in your brain. You're like, oh, okay, this is the next big thing. We don't know that yet, right? But Kyron Lacey is definitely the type of talent that he has caught my eye for a while. And to see him start to put it together, very encouraging. So he's more of a depth receiver right now, but definitely keeping an eye on him because I think especially with Garrett Nussmeier producing a lot so far and with the SEC battles that they're going to get into with QBs across the conference, it'll be fun to keep tabs on that. Ty Felton, from Maryland, 6'1", 180, I think is his official size. So a little bit smaller than the listed 6'2". But the speed, man. I mean, that's the first thing, right? You know, like he breaks the tackle, he gets open field. It's going to be tough to catch him when he has a runway. He can really break loose and generate some big plays, but he's got the quickness as well. I like his quickness, his fluidity. I think he can scrape through arm tackles. The rack has been the biggest thing for me with him as well. But then he can use that speed and bend to kind of sear through open zones at the second level as well. So again, a fun player. He's been very productive. Want to see him keep it going. But he's one of those names that you look at and you can say definitively within this 2-game sample, yes, he's made a name for himself. He's got himself on the radar. And Maryland has had some good guys in recent years. Deshaun Jones, I thought, was a very underrated player last year. Caden Prather has been very good as well. And Ty Felton entering the mix too. I think the speed adds a different element. And I think especially in this receiver class, you don't have a ton of guys who win off of that alone. Ty Felton has that dynamic speed down the field, and I think that's going to make him very unique for a lot of guys. The two, Theo Weiss, and then it was Mario Williams, right? The final two. Okay. Theo Weiss has been a guy that I've liked a lot. Last year, I thought he could have declared and maybe challenged for draft capital, like round 5, round 6, round 7. He came back to school, so he'll be a little bit older as a prospect this year. But I just think he's, again, like you mentioned it, one of those really solid guys who's been around the block a little bit. And athleticism is not lacking with him either. You know, he's not one of those experienced receivers who stuck around because he didn't have the talent to make the leap. He does have the talent. I think he's explosive. He's got enough speed. The fluidity at 6'2", 210 is really impressive to me as well. And I think that's what shined in particular in this 13-catch, 149-yard outing, where he's just, you know, changing directions very well, bending on route breaks, using that fluidity to kind of slither through contact in congested areas as a rack threat too. So that's a very strong part of his game. And then listening to Eli Drinkwitz talk about him as a player, you know, like, hey, he's such a great leader for our locker room, right? You know, the maturity that he shows. I think that's just as much of a boon for him as a prospect, because if you're an NFL team looking for that in the late rounds, there's a PFA. Yeah, this is a guy we want circled because we know he's going to give it his all, and we know he's going to bring a valuable skill set. So Theo Weiss is a guy that I have circled as a late round player. Like if he was still there in round 5, round 6, round 7, I would make a concerted effort to get him, because I think you have enough athletic upside where he can be a legitimate contributor. But even if he's not a rotational player or a low tier starter, you still have a guy who can, you know, he'll be willing to play on special teams, but he can also be a good locker room presence, right? So, you know, just the complete profile in different realms is very appealing with Theo Weiss. So, but he's been productive so far this year, so he could maybe rise a little bit more and end up going middle rounds, something like that. We'll see. It's a deep wide receiver class, but I think that's on the table for sure. And then Mario Williams from USC going to Tulane now. He's a fun player as well. Back when he was at USC, because they had Jordan Addison, they had Dorian Singer at one point too, you know, and we were kind of wondering who's going to be the next big thing from USC. And Mario Williams, watching him in his early days with the Trojans, again, the short area twitch, the hyperactive agility, the foot speed. You talked about the supercharged slot receiver, right? That was exactly what I was kind of, you know, labeling him as at the time. I was like, yeah, keep this guy in your radar for that specific mold. You know, consistency was an issue at USC. The hands were very streaky at times with drops and things like that. And I think some injuries played a hand as well. But now at Tulane, you know, we're kind of seeing him fall into that. I think it was Jaquay Jackson from the 2024 cycle, I want to say. But again, they have a need for that. They always do. It's the type of receiver that they like, and he's filed into that pretty seamlessly. The route running building blocks in particular, the foot speed, the twitch, the ability to redirect very quickly and then channel speed out of those redirections, those diversions. I think Mario Williams has always been really good at that. It's more kind of compiling the remaining parts of his game, right? 5'9", over 190. So he's never going to be a complete contested catch threat, right? He's always going to fall into a specific niche. But I think the niche that he does fall into, I think he can do it very well with that hyperactive agility, with that route running, that conducive route running skill set. And we've seen that so far this year at Tulane. So sometimes guys just need to change the scenery to kind of put that all together. So I think he has done that. But it's crazy. We talk about 5 guys, and we haven't talked about guys like Travis Hunter, Tetairoa McMillan, right? Luther Burden. I think that speaks again to the depth of this receiver class, right? And it's kind of been the nature of the receiver position for the past 3 to 4 years, which is like you can't leave any stone unturned because this position is just so deep. We're in a golden age of wide receiver play, and I don't think it's going to end anytime soon. I think it's still going this year.
Yeah, and last week we hit on, obviously coming off McMillan's monster week 1 and Travis Hunter's monster week 1. We hit on those guys last week, and I almost like catch myself being like, I could talk about those guys every single episode during the season. So I kind of try to like ebb and flow, like in terms of finding some new names and stuff like that, and that kind of seamlessly transitions into a quick Devy Slant report. And last week we talked about the wide receivers here. We talked about Jeremiah Smith and Ryan Williams, and both of those guys had really good week 2s, and we could talk about them again. But the two names I kind of want to bring up here, and if you have any thoughts on them, you could chime in. DJ Lagway out of Florida got the start this past week. Obviously easy win for Florida, but 456 yards and 3 touchdowns. And we look at the underclassmen, non-draft eligible quarterbacks, and you kind of brought it up before, and whether it's the right pronunciation or not, you sounded very confident with Nico's last name. Last week, I kind of battled through it, and I kind of said, you know what, until he's draft eligible, I'm just calling him Nico. But like, we have Nico, we have Jackson Arnold looked really good in week 1. We're still waiting when Arch Manning eventually gets that chance. We got Dylan Raiola at Nebraska, and now DJ Lagway is that kind of guy who is also, I think, going to be in the mix as one of those underclassmen that we're kind of talking about potentially for a while. So there was an impressive opening showing for him as the starter. And then Jeremiah Love, I know Notre Dame had that bad loss this week, but this is 2 weeks in a row right now, and I watch Notre Dame closely. That Jeremiah Love, I know, looked really good. Now, he hasn't seized complete control of that backfield. Week 1, 14 carries, 91 yards and a touchdown. This past week, 11 carries, just under 80 yards and a touchdown. But I thought he looks good as a guy that a year out from being draft eligible. I think he's kind of a name we're going to be talking about next year as an intriguing RB prospect. We know how great of a class it is this year. Next year we'll see who comes back and who doesn't. But I think Jeremiah Love has a chance to kind of materialize and be a guy we're talking about, fast forward a year from now, when we're talking about the running back prospects, for 2026, I think Jeremiah Love could be an interesting name there. Any quick thoughts on either Lagway or Love before we turn our attention to the NFL?
Yeah, for sure. Jeremiah Love, I have not gotten a chance to watch in depth, so I'll refrain from speaking on him so far. I will say, if you're succeeding with that offensive line and without Joe Alt and Blake Fisher, I think that says a lot of good things, because they have had to kind of recalibrate after losing those guys. So I need to watch more of Love, but I'm intrigued for sure. I'm excited to dive in more. Naturally, with NFL draft, I do focus on eligible guys more often, but I do get to see the quarterbacks a lot, right? Because they're under the spotlight, they're getting the ball every snap, and I can speak on Lagway, Nico, Dylan Raiola. I think you never want to look ahead too far, right? But we know Graham Mertz. I don't even know if he'll get the starting job back, to be honest with you. If Lagway plays as well as he does, and if Mertz is out extended period with the concussion, they could just let Lagway roll with it, right? So this might be the Lagway show from now on. And he was a highly touted recruit, right? I think top 5 overall, maybe top 3 overall, right? But top overall QB, 6'3", 230, around there. So rocked up dude. He's always been built ready for the NFL. He's got the athleticism. He's got the arm talent. I think those things alone are things that I like to project off of early on, because they're still developing operationally. It's okay to admit that. But the fact that he produces as well as he did, and it was against Stanford, right? So no one get too excited. We need to see him play in SEC play. But it was a very good debut. It was an inspiring debut. And I think the raw physical talent is enough to project off of when you're going this early. And then Dylan Raiola as well, kind of a different type of player, a different type of quarterback. The Patrick Mahomes cosplay is a little too strong. Maybe dial it back a bit, maybe try a different headband or something. I don't know, but he does look, stylistically, the off-platform ability, the arm elasticity, the angle freedom, those things, they do hold merit. And I also like, for such a young QB, one thing that I noticed against Colorado is he's making decisions very quickly. This is not a guy who's freestyling like Quinn Ewers was doing last year, right? Quinn Ewers has improved at that. But with Raiola already, for such a young QB, I like how quickly he's making decisions. He seems pretty mature for his age as a game manager and a field general. And again, I think that creative ability, that quickness to evade and work off platform, very valuable thing for the modern NFL. So I think Raiola and Lagway is that more explosive talent, but Raiola is that really, really dynamic off-platform thrower, that really malleable quarterback. They're different molds, but they're equally exciting. And I think you never want to look too far ahead. But I think you can say with confidence that we'll be keeping a close eye on them, and they could very well factor into the 2026 and no 2027.
So yeah, 27.
Yeah, it's gonna be a little bit. We got a ways to go, waiting for those guys, but it will be. I think they could very well be factors in that, especially with Nebraska. I think Matt Rule has done a great job getting him the support he needs to flourish as well. So yeah, absolutely. I think they'll be in that discussion. And Nico I just rehashing, the dude's got the talent. I really like his play as well. So 2026 will be for him, but I like his game a lot. Those guys are the main ones for me. I need to get more in depth on the 2026, 2027 players. But I think if you're a Devy guy looking ahead, you can with confidence say Dylan Raiola, DJ Lagway, Nico I. Those are names that you can keep an eye on if you're looking for guys to get ahead on.
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, this is what we do, right? We get excited about these guys for like 2 years, and then when they're draft eligible, I feel like the draft Twitter community just nitpicks them most of the year and critiques them, and then it comes full circle. But right now, it's a great time in terms of young college quarterbacks who aren't even draft eligible, who are basically worthy of being discussed and talked about like on a regular basis. Like I said it last week, I'll say it again. Like I can't remember a Devy Slant report for the first 2 weeks of the college football season since I've been doing Saturday, Sunday, where it's like, wow, I really talk about a lot of guys that are really intriguing, that like high level skills that are immediately showing a high level of production on top of their high level of traits so quickly into a season. And that's what we have with some of these young quarterbacks. It's going to be really fun to kind of follow these guys, throughout their, collegiate career, and then hopefully transitioning to very successful NFL careers. Speaking of the NFL, let's kind of spin this out and rattle off. It's early in the NFL year, right? Only the first week, so we don't want to make any too drastic generalizations. But there are some things that stood out, so we'll hit upon them in the NFL Rookie Report and a quick Fantasy Dynasty Report. For the NFL Rookie Report, it was definitely a week one to forget for most of the rookie quarterbacks in terms of performance. Caleb Williams, I know Chicago had an amazing comeback there from Tennessee. Caleb Williams is not really a part of that. It was defense, it was special teams. He 14 of 29, 93 yards, looked very indecisive. Tennessee's defense had him confused, I think, most of that game. Jayden Daniels, while the fantasy line was great with 88 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns, very inconsistent in terms of his passing, which I think behind that poor offensive line, not a lot of playmakers besides Terry McLaurin. We're going to see a lot of up and down from Jayden Daniels. And then I thought the worst performance was by Bo Nix. He threw the ball 42 times, 138 yards, 2 interceptions. My fears about Bo Nix, when I was very lukewarm on him, thought he was more of a round 2 guy than a round 1 guy. That offense that he ran at Oregon did not ask him to make a lot of NFL throws, and he was great at it, and he mastered that scheme in college. But there's a lot of guys who are really great college quarterbacks that can't transition. Bo Nix in week 1, and it's just week 1. He looked like a guy that when you ask him to start pushing the ball outside the numbers or vertically down the field, there's going to be a lot of issues with that. And I'm just not sure the way he performed highly in college is not that transferable, I think, to what they ask of franchise quarterbacks in the NFL. So I thought there were a lot of early concerns from Bo Nix, but it's one game. Don't want to overreact to it. But I just thought some things that I had concerns about coming into his NFL career quickly materialized in week 1 with the outside the numbers and down the field, where he really had some, indecisiveness and struggles there. Any quick thoughts on the rookie quarterbacks, and then we'll hit the rest of the guys in one fell swoop as well?
Yeah, no, real quick thoughts on the QBs. Caleb Williams, obviously, they kind of won in spite of him, right,
Yeah.
with the defense. As someone who has Chicago's defense, I'm a fantasy team. I wasn't complaining or anything, but I think indecision was a big thing. I think with a lot of these QBs, Bo Nix, Caleb Williams, Jayden Daniels, I think it was a promising debut, right? I think as a passer, definitely still kind of calibrating. But I think the big takeaway for Washington fans to take away from Jayden Daniels is, as a running threat, he is going to be a difference maker. This is a guy who is a dynamic runner at the NFL level, right? It's not a guy who could rely on it in college but couldn't at the NFL. No, this is a guy who has true 4.4 speed. The quickness is really impressive too. He is going to be a weapon on the ground. As long as he can stay healthy, he will be a true weapon on the ground. And I think that's going to be something that can help get them a level ahead for sure on the offensive side. The weaponry is not very strong with him. Terry McLaurin is getting a little older. I think he's still very good, but they got Luke McCaffrey as the wide receiver 2-3, right? So the depth is pretty shallow for that weapons core. I think they still need to get weaponry for him over the next couple of years. It's going to be rough for a few weeks, for a few, every now and then, but as a runner, as a dynamic threat, he is different. I think we're starting to see that. Bo Nix, you kind of hit the nail on the head, right? All of the concerns that you had in his evaluation, and there were some really good traits. I think the off-platform ability, the angle freedom, I think the accuracy, obviously, I think those were very good traits of his. But what were the concerns, right? That the Oregon offense was a little too, it was a little too, it coddled him a little too much, I guess is the word that I would use. And then, not a ton of second level intermediate reads, right? I think a lot of his bad throws, the last interception in particular, just didn't have the vision to see that the guy had two defenders on him in front of him, right? Trying to force something that wasn't there. And then he doesn't have the drive velocity to make those kinds of throws either. His arm strength is decent. I don't think it's close to elite. I think the better component of his arm talent is the angle freedom again. But when you really need to drive the football, he doesn't quite have that. So, and especially for Denver, you get down early, you need to press a little bit more. Is Bo Nix the kind of quarterback that can play in a deficit and get his team back? I don't know consistently. We'll figure it out. We'll see. I think that it's still early. Sean Payton can work with this, but at the same time, every single glaring concern that we had about Nix was kind of exacerbated in week one. It was kind of put on the spotlight, and it's like, this is why you should be concerned. And you never want to see that in week one. It's very early. Keep the book open. But I do think some changes need to occur to better incubate to his skill set. We're still waiting to see Drake May, Michael Penix Jr., JJ McCarthy, obviously out for the year. But the rookie QBs early on, again, I think, each game was kind of a reflection of the flaws that we saw, which is okay. They're rookies. It's early. It's going to happen. With Caleb Williams, it was the indecision. That was the biggest knock for me in his evaluation, is that sometimes he holds the ball a little too long, misses an early read, and kind of invites the chaos that he's so good at navigating through, right? You don't have to rely on that every time. So still things to work on, still early. But those are definitely, I think, safe takeaways to take away from it. Now you just hope they can build on it in the weeks to come.
Yeah, and I think we will see improvement from all of these guys. That's why it's just a quick kind of thoughts from their opening week. No running backs to really kind of talk about. I think that'll be different next year, as we talked about how different the running back class will be next year. If we turn to the pass catchers, I'll start with Brock Bowers because he's the only tight end I want to mention. Brock Bowers, I thought was nicely integrated into that offense. Obviously, the Raiders have a very, below average, I think, type of offense, but you could tell that they're going to find ways to incorporate Brock Bowers into that offense. He probably will be second in targets, behind Devontae Adams, and we'll see how long Devontae Adams even is a member of the Raiders. But I thought it was a good showing to kind of see the versatility that Bowers offers, and they do have a plan for him. And some people might have questioned that when they took him as high as they did, coming off taking Michael Mayer the year before. So there was a nice opening start, 6 catches, 58 yards for Bowers. But I really thought it was some of the wide receivers, really shine this week. And surprisingly, it was not the big three, the top 10 guys. Yeah. Marvin Harrison, only 1 catch for 4 yards. He might have had the game-winning touchdown. Kyler Murray didn't see him. Malik Neighbors, 5 catches, 66 yards, but that Giants offense was pathetic. Daniel Jones and whoever, Drew Lock, that team, they might really hold him back this year. We might have to wait, to future insert rookie quarterback to kind of see the best out of Neighbors, but we'll talk about him because he's constantly going to get peppered with targets. But I thought the guys, and then Cam Coleman, I thought the biggest thing about Cam Coleman was how much he was out there. Not as much of a rotation as maybe we thought. He looks like he's going to be a clear, on the field, most snaps of any of the Buffalo wide receivers. But the guys who found pay dirt this week, Xavier Worthy twice in that opening Thursday night game. You saw the explosiveness on the end around, and then the big shot play down the field as well. Adds a totally different dynamic to that KC offense. They have not had that speed, that big playability since Tyreek Hill left. So it's going to be fun to kind of see him kind of expand his game, but also still maximize his unique skill set of that speed that he offers. Brian Thomas, stock up on him, like right into the mix. Potentially going to be the Jaguars' #1 wide receiver right out of the And as much as I like the player, I thought it might have been a little bit of a slow start for him. Not a guy who I thought was very refined in terms of his route running, didn't really have an extensive route tree. Really impressed with him right out of the gate. 4 catches, 47 yards and a touchdown. And then Ladd McConkey found the end zone. I think he's going to be that guy that you're not going to see a lot of high yardage games, probably especially with the lack of volume that we're going to see from probably the Chargers in terms of their passing game, unless they're really pushed and fall behind. But 5 catches, 39 yards and a touchdown. I think you're going to see a lot of 5-6 catch games from Ladd McConkey in that offense that all of a sudden the end of the year is going to turn around. He's going to be sitting there like 80 to 90 catches, and it might not be for a lot of yards, but it'll be important and integral in the team's success there as they continue to kind of build that team in what Jim Harbaugh wants there. So I thought it was a nice opening showing from Thomas, from McConkey, from Worthy, and then I like the usage from Brock Bowers out of the gate. Any names there, one or two, that maybe something that I said that you kind of want to expand upon a little bit, or kind of elaborate on something I said?
No, I think you hit everything pretty well. I think Brian Thomas Jr., I think for me, the quick start was a little surprising too. My comp for him was Javon Walker, who played with the Packers back in the early 2000s. Took him a couple of years, but he eventually became a Pro Bowl talent. Brian Thomas Jr., the fact that he's acclimating so quickly is a great thing. I didn't necessarily think it wouldn't happen, right? But you're just, for any rookie, you're going to kind of expect a little acclimation period, right? So the fact that he was integrated so quickly, the fluidity, the explosiveness, the tracking, he's exactly what Trevor Lawrence needed at wide receiver. So now they just got to close out games. Obviously, they let Miami back into it. But I think Brian Thomas Jr., especially with Christian Kirk and Gabe Davis, I think it's a great complementary trio. And I think the best is yet to come for them for sure. Ladd McConkey, definitely, I think he's kind of that carving knife type of player, right? Who's just going to, run routes, separate, get himself available. And especially in those clutch situations like that touchdown in the red zone, he is the type of player you can rely on to get that quick separation and make those catches over the middle with strong hands. They got Quentin Johnston, they got Josh Palmer, right? So they were still kind of looking for that type of receiver. I think Ladd McConkey fills that role really well. And I think that Ladd McConkey, I agree with you. I think he'll average probably close to 5'6". They'll go to him often, but he might have a couple games where he's just the hot hand and he can separate and get open like the other guys can't. And maybe they just feed him the football. I think when they're playing from behind, that'll be more prevalent. But he could have a couple games this year where he gets 12, 13 catches just because he is the guy who is so often open, and more so than his counterparts there. So Ladd McConkey, great fit. I think we've seen that so far early on. I think as they rely on him more down the stretch, that's going to be more prevalent. Jalen McMillan from Tampa Bay is another one that I want to mention. I think he only had 1 catch at the end of it for a touchdown. But again, I think he's going to enter that rotation with Chris Godwin and Mike Evans pretty solidly down the stretch. He's got the route running ability. He's got the speed up the seam. He's got the catching too. Now that he's healthy, he's got the confidence. I like that for sure. So Jalen McMillan was a player who I thought was kind of underrated through the process a little bit. And now he's in Tampa Bay. A great offense. Baker Mayfield is still playing lights out. So that's a little fun grouping to watch. And then Brock Bowers was the other one. It's tough for me seeing him in that offense because Gardner Minshew, not that guy at QB. I think they're one of the teams that probably target a franchise QB next year if they can, if the options arise. But again, I think you mentioned it very well as well. The usage versatility. That was the biggest thing with Brock Bowers, is that you can pretty much use him any way you want to. Big slot, off motion, get him design carries. He is that X factor for your offense. And to see the Raiders at least be creative with him and kind of play up to that, very promising. And I think his presence can take the load off of Minshew a little bit down the stretch. I hope so. We'll see with the QB situation how that settles down the road. They got Aiden O'Connell waiting in the wings if things don't work out. I think Brock Bowers, I think the best will come with Bowers when he gets his QB. He doesn't have the QB yet, so it's always going to be a little up and down. But he is the type of talent who just opens up windows for your offense just by being there, just by being present. And so that's a fun possibility for him. And then Keon Coleman too. I still think there's going to be an acclimation period for him just with the skill set, right? Was relatively reliant on contested catches and rack, still learning how to separate consistently. But they are going to give him the reps. And I think that's the one thing that he needs is on-field reps, get some experience, get kind of thrown into the fire. And Josh Allen is the best QB to have for that, because Josh Allen is just, the way that he was playing, man, he's a top 3 QB in the league, maybe even top 2. I think the ability that he has with his legs, but then also just elevating in any way possible. He is the exact kind of QB that you want if you are a guy like Keon Coleman, because you know he's going to give you chances, but he's also good enough where he can do things on his own and rely on other forces, and he doesn't need to funnel to one guy too often. So fun player. And I almost forgot. I talked all the way around him, and then I forgot to mention, which I don't know how, but Xavier Worthy, man, that speed is like, I know everyone was saying it when he got drafted, but the fact that the 31 NFL teams, not 31, but close to it, let the Chiefs take him, right? Come on. That was a massive oversight. I mean, that just should not have happened. Andy Reid with Xavier Worthy, that's some mad scientist stuff right there. It's fun to see it in action, but at the same time, if you're a Chiefs hater, you're like, man, why did this happen again, right? Why did they get this guy? The 4.21 speed is different, and he knows how to use it as a route runner. We didn't see a ton of that. They were kind of scheming him, designing him touches. But again, that speed is lethal. He can destroy tackling angles. He can destroy coverage angles. He tracks the football very well. He's another one where I think we still have yet to scratch the surface of what he can do in that offense. And that's a scary thought, because you got Rashee Rice underneath. He can pull defenses closer to the line on those quick slants. And the moment you play single high, or the moment you leave one kind of section of the field too far open, Xavier Worthy is going to make you pay with that speed. So I think it's kind of a nightmare situation for NFL teams, for the Chiefs, and for NFL fans who just like to watch the game. I think the possibilities are endless with Xavier Worthy in Kansas City. So we saw a little bit of that week one.
Yeah, and you said, like, what's baffling, and I talked a lot about it on draft weekend when I was doing my, after draft, recap shows, is the Bills can't get over the hump because of the Chiefs, and they actively allowed them to trade up, take a position that the Bills needed, and let the Chiefs come up to take, Xavier Worthy. It was one of the most head scratching moves that, they knew they were probably coming up for a wide receiver, even if they didn't know which one. Like, to let the Chiefs get their guy there, it was kind of staggering, and they didn't get much. It was like a day 3 pick or something that they scooped up in the trade back or whatever. It was one of the bigger head scratching moves from draft weekend for sure. Let's close out the night with a quick fantasy dynasty report. I have 5 names of guys. I don't want to make over crazy, stock up, stock down on these NFL guys off of 1 week. None of these guys really even playing the preseason, but some guys that I thought did stand out that I could see now are trending as guys that should be moving up, dynasty positional rankings or just overall dynasty rankings. At the running back position, I was really intrigued with Kenneth Walker. I was high on him coming into the year. I've never been in my pre-draft evaluation. I was not a big Charbonnet guy. Most people had him as the top 3 back that class. He was more like 7 or 8 for me. I think there's a big talent disparity between Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. And now with the regime out that drafted Charbonnet, I think Kenneth Walker is going to really kind of separate himself, because I think his skill set is not that far behind a Breece Hall. They came out in the same draft class. Really intrigued with him. He had a good opening week. I know he got nicked up at the end. Hopefully nothing serious there. So I think he should be a guy moving up dynasty ranks. Devin A-Chain, he's already pretty high up in most running back boards, but I thought what really stood out was they talked about getting him involved in the pass game, but then they actually went out and did it. And that's a scary thought, to get him the ball in space in that regard, on top of what he does as a pure runner. If he starts being a guy that's going to get, 10, 12 rushes, and then you're also going to find a way to get him like 3, 4 catches a game, you're talking about a guy who could really push to be a top 4, top 5 overall running back in terms of fantasy. At the wide receiver position, I thought Rashee Rice looked faster and quicker on that Thursday night game than I've ever seen him. I didn't think, to me, he looks like he's a little thinner than when he was a prospect coming out, more explosive. They're lining him up in the slot, and they were just feasting on that. I think we're going to see a big year out of Rashee Rice. Obviously, there could be a possible suspension issue, but if take that out of the picture for right now, just on the football field, intrigued with what we saw in his usage. Him and Worthy, could be a really dynamic 1-2 weapon there. With Kelsey right now, but even post Kelsey, Jameson Williams looked unbelievable last night. That was the guy that I was super high on coming out. Great to see him kind of get this year started out. I think people forget just how talented of a prospect he was because of everything he's kind of dealt with early on in his collegiate career. And then Isaiah Likely, he looked like the clear better tight end. And I don't want to come on here and say he should be ahead of Mark Andrews in dynasty leagues because it's week 1. Let's see how things play out. But take Andrews out of it for a second. Likely looked like that prolific pass catcher that we saw in college football that didn't test out great in the pre-draft process. But then since he's been in the NFL, when he's gotten a chance, he's been a productive receiver. He looked great last week, and a guy who I think really could emerge there to be no worse than the third best pass catcher there behind Zay Flowers and Mark Andrews. But I don't think it's a better percentage chance. And I think people want to think that. I don't think it's inconceivable he does outproduce Mark Andrews this year. I wouldn't be ready to go there and say that just yet, but the difference in their speed on week one was staggering in terms of, likely making a catch and picking up, yards after the catch and being a more explosive weapon. That I think it's something that at least be worth discussion and likely should be a guy moving up dynasty ranks for sure. Any closing thoughts on those guys? Is there one or two that what you saw in the first week of the season has you excited for maybe what we're going to see from them throughout the year?
Yeah, for sure. I think Likely had a great night on Thursday. I think as a prospect, he was always one of those guys who you're thinking in the right spot, this guy could be legit. And I think the Ravens is the right spot for him. They know how to use those tight ends. He can obviously block. He knew the little utility things, but as a receiving threat, right? I mean, generating the rack, making that tough catch in the back of the end zone. It was just ruled out of bounds, right? Just by a toe. But you even when the play doesn't count, you can see that he has the ability to really convert in those clutch situations. I mean, he's got the spatial awareness, he's got the hand strength, the body control. And Mark Andrews is getting older. So I don't want to, he's not, on the hot seat by any means, but I do think, a team like the Ravens is not shy. They don't shy away from riding with the hot hand. They drafted Charlie Kolar kind of early too. And they Isaiah Likely has taken the reins as that tight end too. And, I think the Ravens, when they have a hot hand, they are going to ride it, right? So Mark Andrews is getting older. Isaiah Likely, I would say stock is up for sure. Will he be the tight end one in the near future? I don't know. But he kind of proved in week one, like, hey, you got to get me involved. You got to keep me involved because you're going to benefit from it. So I think once you make that argument as a player, it's pretty tough to counteract. So stock up for sure. Kenneth Walker, I will say stock slightly up. I like his ability a lot. No arguments about his ability, just waiting on the injury, right? And then also the Seahawks interior offensive line. I don't love that interior offensive line. I think down the stretch in the season that could age a little poorly. The center and the guard combo that they have with the injuries. And I know Laken Tomlinson in particular has an injury history. So I'm still waiting to see how that plays out over the course of the year. But Kenneth Walker, the ability with him is unique, is next level. And I don't think Zach Charbonnet can replicate that. I think Charbonnet is more of a linear downhill kind of thrasher type. I think Kenneth Walker is a make you miss type, and he can create space and send a defender into a wormhole or something like that. He's that different type of evasive talent. And I think that's unique in the NFL. It's something that can play really well. So stock slightly up, still waiting on the injury. And the offensive line, I'm curious to see how it ages down the year. Rashee Rice, I would say stock up for sure. Maybe not stock way up because, again, Xavier Worthy is there. He's going to take away some of the targets. But I think Xavier Worthy and Rashee Rice, they make such a good tandem because they put defenses in this endless tug of war. You got to come up to the line and take away that quick slant. Xavier Worthy is going to burn you over the top, or he's going to burn you on a design handoff or something like that. If you try and play too high, right, and you try and put the cap on for the Chiefs, then Rashee Rice is going to eat up the middle and in a short range with a quick slant or a drag route, things like that, right? So, either way, no matter how you spin it as a defense, someone's going to burn you, right? It's just a matter of who it is. And I think that tug of war is so valuable for an offense to have. And Andy Reid is the exact kind of, mastermind offensive coordinator who knows how to exploit that. So I would say just stock up for the Kansas City offense now that they have two actual wide receivers who can perform that function. So it's fun to see. It's fun to see Travis Kelce getting older throws a wrench into the equation because he's such a good mismatch generator on his own. What happens when they don't have him anymore? We have to have that conversation at some point. I don't think it's going to happen this year, but eventually it will. He's getting older. But until then, I like this offense a lot. Jameson Williams, stock up for sure. I think that the one hang up that I would have with the Lions offense is that you've got Amon-Ra St. Brown, you've got Sam Laporta, Jahmyr Gibbs. You got a lot of mouths to feed. And I think each week with Jared Goff and Ben Johnson, it's going to be a different hot hand, right? So Jameson Williams might be a little sparse one week more than the other. But I do think you mentioned it, you hit the nail on the head. people forgot how talented he was as a prospect. People forgot how good he was as a prospect. He wasn't an elite route runner or a catcher, but I do think the route running building blocks, the stop and start ability, right, the separation potential was definitely there. The tracking down the field was definitely there. And then now with a creative offensive coordinator like Ben Johnson, you can utilize him in a ton of different ways with that long strider speed. He eats up ground. So I think that the toughness that he's shown kind of working to this point where he's now available, because it was not looking this good, the outlook, for a long time, but now it is. And I think the fact that he's worked his way back, that alone speaks to some of the security that he has. He's in the equation. He's going to stay. And I think that speed gives him a unique element that no one else on the Lions offense has. So stock up for him for sure. Devon Achane, I will say stock slightly up. Again, the injuries, he's always struggled to stay healthy. So far this year, it hasn't been an issue, but it was an issue in college. It was an issue in 2023. I'm always a little apprehensive with guys like that, especially when they're a little undersized. That said, the speed is lethal. They use him in the passing game. Raheem Mostert is getting older as well. So once he moves on, Achane may take an even greater piece of the pie in that offense. They got Jalen Wright, so he will factor in as well. But Devon Achane, when he's healthy, he's legit. He's got the vision. He's got the creative instincts. He's got the footwork. He's got the speed. Everything that you need to be a dynamic two-phase threat. Just can he stay healthy and available? That's the biggest question for me. But if you're willing to take a gamble on that, I say roll with it, because that offense is the perfect one for him.
Yeah, it's kind of fun watching these guys. I think they're in ideal situations to kind of maximize their skill set. I mean, Jameson Williams, the start of his career, right, coming off the injury and then that weird suspension, like it was just like there was a lot of things that I think impacted him getting off to a slow start. But I think he's going to show people, even if the production for fantasy is not there consistently week in and week out, I think we're going to see that guy that was so highly regarded coming out. And then the injury with Achane getting involved in the passing game, maybe they don't have to use him as much, right, between the tackles, whether it's Mostert now and then down the line, Jalen Wright. I think him being more of that space player as a receiver and runs on the outside, maybe preserve that concerns about, kind of run him right in the middle between all those giant defensive linemen where he might get nicked up a little bit. So it was fun to kind of see him incorporated there. Ian, thank you so much for hopping on. I know we went a little bit longer going through the 4 segments tonight, but it was a lot of fun. I'm sure a lot of my audience follows you and the great work you're doing over there at Pro Football Network. But please let them know where to follow you just in case they aren't. If there's anything you got going on over there that you want to promote or plug, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, for sure. And, going over, it's something I'm used to at this point. I talk way too much, man. So every time someone says like 45 minutes, I'm like, make it an hour, because it's going to be an hour. This is what happens. But yeah, you can follow my work at IC_draft on X, formerly Twitter. I'm going to keep calling it Twitter. That's what it is to me. IC_draft. Any draft questions you have, feel free to send them my way. I'm going to be splitting time during the season at College Football Network, CFN, as well on Saturdays, just kind of providing news and analysis there. So Ali Hodgkinson, Cam Mellor, those are my guys at that site. So give them a follow as well. Give PFN a follow. And once the season is over, through the season, we'll have draft analysis and updates for you. But once the season is over, that's when we'll really kick it into gear. And that's when we'll really give comprehensive draft analysis. So stay tuned for that, because we will be putting in work behind the scenes with scouting reports and the rankings. And we will be ready, full throttle when the time comes. So until then, any questions you have, hit me up at IC_draft on Twitter.
Absolutely, guys. Make sure you're following him. Make sure you're checking out all his great work, and hopefully we could have him back on here during the season a few more times if he wants to, and we'll chat it up like we did tonight. So, on behalf of Ian, on behalf of our sound tech engineer David Nicano, and myself, thank you for joining us, and we look forward next time taking you from Saturday to Sunday.